Captain?
What's going on?
Happy Wednesday.
You surviving?
Barely. Just barely. So I'm in the confines of the playroom now. I think last time I talked to you I was somewhere else in somebody's bedroom, but today I'm in the playroom, Aaron. So
how's the new dog?
There's 2 dogs. Not one, but 2 chihuahuas. 2 little baby chihuahuas are both about this big. But they're good. They're happy. We got Gary's the boy and Violet's the girl.
Nice.
So, yeah. So anyway, can everybody hear us okay, I guess? Is there an echo? There is an echo? Do you have are you getting an echo, Aaron, on your end?
I am.
You are? Let's just turn off one mic. There's literally only one mic on. I don't know how that works. It's echoey. Hold on, let me see if I can figure this out. Hold on. How's that? Is that better? Oh, I see. I think it says Aaron turn off. It says Aaron turn off one of your mics. Or I need earphones. Oh, it's on your side. I don't know.
It's on my side.
Let's let it roll. Somebody says Johnny Ruiz. Aaron, do you know who ever heard of Johnny Ruiz? You ever heard that name before?
I haven't.
You gotta see this kid. He's one of Yankees' students. He just stripes it. He just absolutely
stripes
it. Okay.
Is this better?
Yeah, it says no echo now.
All right, cool.
So we're good. Okay. So everybody, this is Aaron Dill. We're back again doing Wedge Wednesdays, and he's the guy to talk to about wedges. So I want to talk about fitting today. Wedge fitting is something that's not talked about enough, in my opinion. I think, drivers and irons and all that stuff is always a big topic of discussion, but wedge fitting to me, especially for the higher handicappers, it's a big deal. So talk me through the Aaron Dill experience when they're getting a wedge fitting, whether it's on tour or at TPI. What do you do? Walk me through what you're looking for, what you're looking to see.
All right, so the process on tour is very different than what we do at Oceanside. Oceanside's our best chance at kind of digging deeply into somebody's set or maybe their technique or issues they're having, because it's really uninterrupted time. So if I'm ever trying to fit somebody, I'm always trying to get them to come out to Oceanside first, because I think that's the best place to get work done. If it's on tour, it's usually a pretty brief process. I'll usually check in with everybody and say hello. And if it was you, Johnny, if I came up to you, I'd say, hey, how's it going? What's the golf course like? Are you experiencing anything interesting? Anything that's giving you any problems? And we would assess those issues right there. If you were a new player, I'd take a look at your set and measure all your specs. During that process of kind of pulling that information out, I'd be asking a lot of questions about, where are you practicing? What are your golf courses like? What kind of grass do you play on? You have a lot of sand in the bunkers. And then we're going to dig deeper into some of the issues that you may be dealing with, because I think when you solve those issues, everything else kind of falls into place and you get better. A lot of times, guys into more bounce. I kind of tell them that I'm like, this is like training wheels. You know how to ride the bike, but sometimes you forget. And this is just that added little bit that's going to help kind of keep you from falling over. So I'm going to check those specs, ask you a bunch of questions. I'm going to start diagnosing some of the issues, and then once I have that, I can start kind of piecing things together. If it's something like working at Oceanside, I'll kind of run through that same process again, but then we can actually get deeper into hitting shots and practicing and seeing what some of the common issues are, maybe some of the things you do well, and then we can sort of piece that matrix together. And there's always a goal in mind, and the goal in mind is to put together 3 to 4 wedges that will kind of give you the shots you want to hit, but also make the shots you don't hit well better. And all those things will sort of fall together. That everybody's better for it.
So if you're taking a player like this, is actually quickly. Are you on tour? Are you typically adding more bounce to a player's bag, or are you taking it away?
We're going both directions.
Both directions. Okay.
A lot of it's based on where we are in the country, issues. Maybe it's a coaching change. Maybe a coach comes in, he makes a couple little changes. A lot of it's path related as well. So if guys are from the inside, we have to change bounce based on that path as well. So you see a lot of the guys who are really good with short game, they keep the club out in front of them, and they make great contact all the time. The guys who are a little bit stuck from the inside, we have to actually adjust bounce based on how they're, what kind of turf conditions they're in and what kind of issues they're having. So It's a week to week thing. We base it on conditions and what's going on with their swings.
So if you take, so like from Sm7 to Sm8, and I know they're similar, but I know like in the 58 and above, right, you guys added some weight in some places to basically make the head more stable so it didn't twist as much. It's kind of like how I've made sense in my head. So from a ball flight perspective on a shorter shot around the greens when you're in a fitting, are players noticing the difference between those two wedges? Like if they're hitting a little, I can't even describe the shot, but if they're playing like an open face shot, typically a shot where the face would sort of flare open and then hit a little floater to the right. What I noticed with the Sm8 is that that shot seems to hold its spin and hold its trajectory a little bit longer than normal. So when you're in a fitting, especially with the new wedges, is that something that you noticed? Like, is that stuff that the guys talked about on certain shots? Like, they weren't getting that little floaty ball to the right. Now it's staying on line a little bit longer. Because people ask me that question all the time, the difference between Sm7 and Sm8, and I always narrow it down to that, literally that shot.
Yeah, so, for everybody listening, when we're designing product, we're basing this on feedback from people who are listening right now, so our consumers, but we spend a lot of time on tour studying and asking a lot of questions about what our tour players want as well. And that's the information that we take back and we use. The biggest difference I think people are seeing in Sm7 versus Sm8 is a couple things. The goal was to actually help guys keep the ball through the lower window more often. That's where we added some of that weight. The benefit of the stability was something we weren't actually trying to achieve. It was almost like we killed two birds with one stone, so to speak. So the goal was to move weight in ways we can move CG in different places to help guys keep the ball through the lower windows. And in doing so, we increased stability, but we also softened the field. So we got three great things out of one goal.
Okay. So I got a question, and it's fitting related, but you, I think it was last year, I think it was actually, I mean, you and I may have talked about this in the podcast, but Max Homa made an interesting kind of wedge decision or wedge shakeup right before he won. I think it was literally right before he won, where he was struggling with, I think it was in Louisiana, and he was digging into the grass or something. Tell me that little Max Homa story, because he went on to win a couple weeks later, but he was struggling with turf interaction with one of his wedges. He went in and fixed it.
He did, yeah.
Do you remember that story? Yeah.
I do. So this is going to be a couple little things here. So when he was in Louisiana, I was not there. He was texting me and he was saying, "Hey, I'm struggling with just kind of finding the bottom." And that golf course is really tough. There's a lot of grain to it, and it's got a lot of sand in the soil. So you have a tendency to hit some fat shots from time to time. So he texted me. He said, "Hey, are you here?" I said, "Sorry, I'm not. What can I do?" He said, "Don't worry about it. Let's meet up in Charlotte, and we'll figure out what's going on there." So we get to Charlotte. He's describing some of the issues that he had, and right away I knew the club was coming slightly from the inside. So again, when the club gets from the inside, you tend to bottom out a little early. When you catch one a little fat or you catch one a little thin, you try and do the opposite. And now you're trying to pick off the ground. Now you're catching it a little thin all the time. And you
like
just
a two-way miss.
You get this like limbo of fear, like I don't want to fat it, I don't want to thin it, and you kind of lose your way.
Right.
And Quail Hollow is one of the purest tracks we visit all year. I mean, it's just in phenomenal shape. The practice area is perfect. And so when he hit a couple shots, he described to me the issues. I said, "Hey, I think I know what's going on. You're a little bit from the inside. Don't change what you're doing. Let me go ahead and make a change to the golf club. We're going to get two things right away. We're going to reduce bounce. That's going to delay the impact of the ground on the club. And you're also going to help create some lift, because some of those greens are elevated. There's some tough pin placements, so you're going to get the added benefit of hitting it higher, but you're also going to get the benefit of not hitting the ground first." Okay. So he's like, "Okay, fine, whatever, I trust you." It's funny, if you know Max, he just goes, "I don't really know what you're talking about, just go do it, and we'll see what happens." So we took him from, a little bit higher bounce model to, which was an M grind at the time, it was an 8M, down to a 4-degree L. And that, again, took that early click out of the way and freed up that club just to kind of slide on the ball a little bit easier. The other thing we did, and this is more shaft related, is we softened the shaft. We went from a high rev KBS 2.0 135X down to an S. And right away, I was like, I can feel so much more when I slow down.
Because you get more play at the bottom. Yeah.
You got a little more lag, but he could feel a lot more, and that just kind of freed him up to be a little bit more flexible around the greens.
So the reason I'm asking, that's obviously an unbelievable fitting question, because you can't getting a wedge fitting, for example, like, players kind of get wedges and like, okay, this is what I have and this is what I'm using, and I don't know why I'm in a bad shot here, and this one works, but this one doesn't work quite well. Sometimes it's literally a bounce thing or a grind thing, and there's always something to do with a wedge. That's why wedge fittings are important, right? So one of the challenges that I hear from fitters constantly, and it was a question that popped up here, and it's a great question, is for fitters, like, how do you diagnose somebody inside on a mat to fit them into wedges? Because typically high-end fittings usually are done inside on a mat. So are you using angle of attack to diagnose a player? Is it spin? Like, what is it, in your opinion, on how to effectively fit somebody off of a mat, in a TrackMan? It's hard, right?
That's so tough. That is so tough. And whenever somebody asks me about fitting advice, that's my first advice every time. Please get fit outdoors. You need to be able to see ball flight. You need to be able to feel grass. The problem with mats is mats are all a little different. Sometimes they're firm, sometimes they're soft. Mats typically will make the ball go higher. Right. So, TrackMan will show you higher launch angles when in actuality you might be lower. That'll also, change from spin as well. And the TrackMan, while it's an incredible tool, indoors it may not give you perfect information. The same thing, also goes with lie boards. Lie boards, they lie. And the markings that you see on the bottom of a golf club may not actually show the end result of what the golf ball is doing downrange. Right. So if you guys are going to get fit, please do whatever you can to get fit outdoors. If you don't have that luxury, try and really talk to the fitter or whoever you're working with and share information historically that about your golf ball. Does it go to the right? Does it go to the left? Is it high? Is it low? A good fitter will be able to take that information and kind of diagnose and figure out what to do from there.
Okay, aside from the obvious things that you would notice if you're not hitting your wedge as well, like I chunk, am I thin, am I do this, I do that, like what are some characteristics of a wedge that doesn't fit you right? Is the ball flaring out to the right? Is it, is it coming out hot? Like, how can you tell if something doesn't work? You, Aaron, if you're looking at a player, like, how do you assess something like that? Without them saying anything, just looking at the ball.
Yeah, I mean, there's a visual sweet spot that everybody's eye wants to see, right? There's also a directional. I think if you go and you look at golf balls on tour, you're going to see this kind of lower launching ball flight, it's slightly draw bias, hugs these lower windows. It's a sign of hitting carry numbers easily, but also having good stopping power and spin. Anything that kind of creeps above 30 degrees in launch you're going to see this reduction in spin. So anywhere in 27 to 30 is a sweet window, and there's tons of stopping power. Once you creep above that, it gets a little inconsistent. But look for lower ball flights. Focus on direction. Which way do you want to curve? Do you want cuts? Do you want straight? Do you want draws? Understand what that is. If you look at the golf club itself, the face and the sole, you're going to see signs of wear. Anything above grooves, anything above grooves. 5, you're going to see some diminishing returns. Anything obviously outside of center, you could see some funny things. The sole can tell you a good story as well. If you see a lot of wear in the back of the sole, you're typically going to be a high ball flight guy because you're actually increasing loft by letting the club catch up.
Yes.
And vice versa. If you get a lot of wear in the front, ball flight's going to be low. So, take the information that bring that in. Good fitters will be able to kind of look at that information or take that information from you and say, okay, this is what's going on. Think about your golf course. Is your golf course soft or firm? Think about mistakes. Pay a lot of attention to those things. I think anytime you can bring in mistakes and issues into a fitting and allow the fitter to diagnose those issues, you're going to be able to go out and play better golf because you've got a better chance of getting good results. So the more information, the better, especially if you're indoors. But hit everything that you can and try it, because I think when you go in and buy, so you can leave with maybe something that you didn't think you'd leave with.
Right. Speaking of good wedge players, James O just said hi to both of us. I think you know James.
I do.
Who's one of the grittiest players I've ever seen in my life. Okay, so that's fitting. Now let's talk about marrying up the ball. How important marrying up your golf ball is with a wedge fitting, because everybody, once again, it's all driver. I mean, driver needs to match up with the golf ball and yada yada yada. I'm so committed to the fact that if you do nothing else, get fit for wedges and your golf ball, because for the normal player, that's going to save you more strokes in your driver far. So how do you do that? How do you make sure that the golf ball, like if the wedges seem to be working, but the player's still not quite getting the performance, are you ever looking at the golf ball going, hey, maybe you should go to Pro V1 instead of Pro V1X? Or do you ever make that decision, or do you ever suggest that they should take a look at the golf ball instead?
Yeah, I do make some suggestions. You know, I'm a little biased. I'm a wedge guy. I'm always focused more on the wedges, but you know, the reality is that, like you said, a lot of our scores revolve inside of 140 yards. If you have more success with wedge and putting, you're gonna shoot lower scores. So I always tell guys, hit from the green to the tee. Start their green side. Does it feel good on the putter? Can you get spin around the greens with the wedges? Is your ball flight kind of going through the window you want? Once that stuff is good, then you can start moving backwards. See how it does for the wind with the irons, and see what it does with the driver. I always tell guys, try and find something that creates the spin that you want. Most of the time, I would say that guys tend to gravitate to the X ball if they're looking for spin around the greens. It's hit or miss. I think anybody who is thinking about making a ball change, take a look at those numbers and ask yourself those questions, and get on a TrackMan if you can, and see what that information is.
Because I've heard, I forget who told me this, but they were like, they wish that they wish fitters would fit the golf ball to the third shot, because, like, for example, Aaron Dill, you are a third shot tech, meaning where you live, the wedge shots are typically the third shot on a par 4, maybe on a par 5, yada yada yada, right? Like, that's where you live, and the ball should match up specifically to the third shot. It has more value matching up for your third shot than it does your drive.
Sure.
And I forget who told me this, but it was a serious rabbit hole of information. I was like, that's actually really interesting. So, yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but that's just something that popped into my head. Okay, I want to talk about specific players. And I just want to let's ask a couple of questions on here. ZM Williams 88 says, do KBS Tour shafts lower swing weight in a Vokey? Thanks. Is that the question you can answer?
It is a question I can answer. So, KBS Tour, I'm not going to speak to all of their products, but I know that early KBS shafts, they were not as tip heavy as Dynamic Gold. So when we design Dynamic Gold S200 as our stock shaft, the KBS Tour 120 is not as tip heavy, which means that swing weight's going to go down a little bit. It's usually about a point and a half. I will say that KBS has done a nice job in the last probably 6 to 12 months of coming out with a shaft that does match up swing weight wise. So, whatever they're bringing out new should match up nicely, in that standard swing weight range. Okay.
Clay Thompson says, why do Vokey wedges have an extended trailing edge? In other words, when you open up a 10-plus degree Vokey, it raises the leading edge a lot. Seems like you'd have bounced at leading edge without extending. It's an interesting question.
Bounce at leading edge?
Yes, I'll read it one more time. It says, why do Vokey wedges have an extended trailing edge? In other words, when you open up a 10-plus degree Vokey, it raises the leading edge a lot. Seems like you could have bounced at leading edge without extending.
Well, when we engineer, we do with both. We try and get bounce in certain places in the right ways, right? So we'll use the 10S as an example. It's got a bunch of forward bounce to protect you when the face is square, but it does have a ribbon on the back if you need to be creative and you need to have some versatility. If guys, we do have this happen a lot on tours. Guys are looking at this ground height number. It's basically where you set the wedge down in a green gauge or daily cruise, and you measure the height between the ground and the leading edge, or what you see as the leading edge. Mm-hmm. And those numbers will go up and down based on where the contact is made on the sole. So maybe if it's a wider sole, it might tend to sit a little bit higher, especially if it has a higher bounce angle. And then some of our models will sit a bit lower, like a T grind and an L grind. So it's kind of trying to find that perfect chemistry of forward and trailing edge bounce.
Okay. C to Cells 0821. I think you kind of answered this last time, but I'll ask it again. So what is your personal favorite grind, and who does he think has the best wedge game on tour? I know the answer to the second one, but what is your favorite? Like, what grind do you kind of like have a soft spot for?
Ooh, At the moment, my favorite grind is probably the L.
Okay, interesting.
It's been kind of dry here in Southern California, and whenever I've gone out and pitched and chipped a little bit, it's been a good friend to me. I'm testing it right now. But I go back and forth. A lot of guys ask me what's in my bag, and I don't have a standard stock set. I try and take some stuff out and replace it with something different that I haven't hit in a while, because I want to kind of brush up and stay sharp with what I'm feeling, or what my personal sense is of what each grind brings.
Right.
So I try and change that up. And then rummy. Obviously, rummy is probably the best set of wedge hands I've worked with. Obviously, everybody's really good. You look at, Patrick Cantlay's unbelievable. Justin Thomas is unbelievable. Jordan Spieth. Webb Simpson. Webb Simpson.
Webb Simpson's
a lot of times, I'll tell you a great story about Webb Simpson. For years and years, we've worked together, and Webb and Poulter they spend a lot of time around the short game area, and they have these little bets, and they have a little fun, and it sort of pushes and motivates Webb to step up his short game. And so Paul would say, I bet you a buck, you can't hit it inside of 5 feet to this pin or whatever. And so they would do that, and I'd come up and I'd kind of get in there a little bit, and I'd lose a buck here and take a buck there. And I've had this dollar in my van for the last 8 years that I took from Webb in Cromwell. It's awesome. It's my good luck charm.
I don't know. You were on that podcast we did with him and JJ and Paul Tesori. Yeah. And he said something really interesting, because I'm super into this golf IQ thing and how people strategize and go to the golf course. And he said something really interesting. He's like, Webb shows up to the first tee with 26 clubs in his bag. And I thought that was interesting, because he's got his half hybrid, his full hybrid. He's got all these different, you can't turn one club into 4 clubs. And I guess every player can do that, but they legitimately look at their bag that way, which goes to the point. Somebody asked me this up top. What are your thoughts on a player having 5 wedges in their bag? So going 46, 50, 55, 60, 64, kind of like what I used to do. What are your thoughts?
I had one player, Kevin Doherty. He was my first 5 wedge guy. And if you guys don't know who Kevin Doherty is, Kevin Doherty's he's on the Corn Ferry Tour right now, but he's just a stud. And he was my first 5 wedge guy, and I was so blown away. I was like, wow, this is so cool. We've never done that before, but it's a lot of wedges. I don't see a lot of guys carrying around that many every week. Sometimes if they do it because they're trying to find that perfect chemistry. Like Adam Scott carries 2 different sets. He carries a 3 wedge set, and he carries a 4 wedge set. Mm-hmm. And he decides which of those sets he's going to play based on the length of the golf course and maybe some of the short game shots he has to hit. I'd say 8 out of 10 times he's playing the 4 wedge setup, but when you get to a place like Congressional where it's really long, he's got to go to 3 to make room for a long iron or something. So, it's not uncommon to see guys, like you said, have a golf IQ or really sort of decide what their 14 club matrix is on a Wednesday afternoon before they have to go out and play tournament golf, because they really don't know until they get on the golf course.
Right. I was going to ask you this a long time ago. What are your thoughts on it's another question I get. So as far as the gapping, and it's always the weirdest gapping between the pitching wedge and your first gap wedge. So, a lot of pitching wedges now go for even 45, 44, 45, 46 degrees. And then some guys go to 50, 52, yada, yada, yada. But that could be a 7-degree gap. It could be a 5-degree gap. What's the perfect, for you, in your opinion, what's the perfect gapping there? What's too much? Is 45 to 52 too big of a gap? Or is it player specific?
Yeah, well, it's certainly player specific. If a guy can only play 3 wedges and he's a high ball speed guy, then it is what it is. We have to have big gaps. Right. Me as a fitter, I would typically tell guys, listen, play more wedges if you can. Try not to exceed 12 to 15 yards in between each wedge.
Okay.
I think that's a really important thing that you got to think about is, you don't want to have too big of gaps in between those clubs, because that's where your scoring takes place. If we do have some situations where let's say a guy's playing a 45-degree pitching wedge, and he's got to get a gap wedge and a sand wedge and a lob wedge, and he prefers his lob wedge to be more than 62 degrees. There's obviously going to be a huge gap.
Right.
And that's where you have to sort of rethink, what is the value in that club? Is it a full shot club? Because a lot of times the 60 and 58s, they're not full shot clubs. They are 3-shot or 3/4 and under clubs, and there really is no depth or importance to hitting them full. So don't worry about how far that carries. Again, fitter, I'm not concerned about what the loft is, as long as the carry number is what it's supposed to be.
See, that's the thing is like, and I want to get onto two players here in a second, but putting lofts on the clubs, and just from an optic standpoint, I love this sometimes for who is it, Keith Mitchell? I think you put gap, sand, and lob or whatever you do on his wedges, which I think is the greatest thing ever. I want it so bad, but the loft of a golf club and representing, like, knowing what, like my 3-iron's 21 degrees or this and that, I don't think it has any value anymore. Like, I wish it was more centered around, like, this is my 220 club, this is my 209 club, this is my 207 club, and getting people's mind turned around and not being so married to the loft number on a club, but literally what its job is. Like if you talk to, and you've worked with, Bernhard Longer's got a couple of Vokey wedges, or at least one in his bag, or he has in the past. He gaps his bags out literally by yardage. He could have 4 7-irons in his bag. If one of them goes 160 and the other one goes 120, he didn't care. I think that's interesting. Like, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, is that something you agree with, or is there a marriage between the two?
Yeah, I mean, I try and not put a lot of weight on what's posted on the golf club. I'm not really worried about what the bounce says. I'm not worried about what the loft says. I'm worried about the end result. That's right. That's the most important thing to me. And I think you take guys like Keith Mitchell, who, to be fair, he likes to put the G, S, and L on there because it's fun. It's different.
I love it. But I think it's so rad.
But I've had players over the years who are. They're just uncomfortable with seeing things that they don't want to see. Like Denny McCarthy's a great example of somebody who says, I don't really like seeing certain numbers, so I weld his out and I stamp something else. And Same thing, I've had some players that I weld out the lofts all together and I'll just put the carry number on there. So it'll be 122, and so...
That's rad.
You just try and have some fun with it and try and free up their minds. I think it's easy to get superstitious. We're just trying to make sure the end result is the precise result that helps these guys have better chance of making birdies.
Okay, let's talk about player specific. So we've talked about Justin Thomas before. I'm going to get to him last, but I want to talk a little bit about Ian Poulter, who is somebody that, not only an equipment junkie himself, but very interesting profile because, the makeup of his wedges are, he's got super low bounce stuff, super high bounce, and he's kind of all over the map. So explain to me, just go wedge to wedge, if you don't mind, what you do for him and what kind of stuff he has in there.
So he's all Sm8 raw finish, 5212, 5614, and 60A, which is a 4-degree option. And Ian's really sharp. He's got a process. He thinks a lot. He's really, really bright in terms of just kind of piecing together what works best for him. And one thing I think is really, really cool about his setup is that he's got one high bounce option and he's got one low bounce option. And that kind of opens up a bunch of windows into hitting some different shots or different shot shapes. And I see a lot of guys who come in and they've got the same grind and the same bounce and everything. And when I ask them why they do it, they don't have a good answer for me. They said, I don't know. And part of that fitting process is understanding why you take certain bounces home. Why do I have that bounce? What do I do with it? Is it the best thing for me? And I'd say most of the time when we fit somebody, they leave with something different than they came with and with a different perspective or different understanding as to why. So, in Ian's case, he needed a high bounce option. That allowed him to be successful into the grain, into, sandy bunkers, maybe wanting to flight the ball a little bit easier. And then when it came to his more dominant short game club or, his 60, he needed to create lift. He needed some versatility. He needed to have less bounce in those certain situations. So that's where the low bounce 60 really helps him. All of his wedges are actually 35.5 inches. So usually guys will go down a quarter inch.
That's just a quarter inch. Then that's because pitching wedge is usually 35 3/4. So his his pitching wedge 35.5 too.
His pitching wedge is not, but his gap wedge is 35.5. So that's standard. The sand wedge is plus a quarter, and the lob wedge is plus a half. So they all are cut at 35.5 inches, and that's just something that he likes. He likes to feel some consistency in the length. That's the way he's always been, and he likes them lighter. So he's in that lower swing weight range. There's a couple guys who do that. Patrick Cantley's his lob wedge is C9 right now. So it's all about feel. It's all about connecting.
On his wedges, it's C9.
No, on his lob wedge only. He's looking to connect with a certain feel. And you can't argue with the guy because he's got some of the greatest hands in golf, and what he feels is so much deeper than what I might feel. I need to sort of
so how do you
understand that.
How do you get him to C9? What do you do? Like add a pound of lead tape to the handle? Like how do you do that?
No, it's just part of our polishing process. It's funny, like when we designed his lob wedge, we just sort of found it by accident, And so we polished it, and this is common with tour players. Is they're looking for a certain feel, they're looking for certain looks and sounds, and so he would say to me, "Hey, I want to try something new. What do you think I should do?" And he'd just say, "Go make something." And so I'd go make it, and I'd take it out. He'd hit a couple shots, and he'd go, "Just grind it here, grind it there." I'd take it back in, come back out, hand him the Sharpie. Let's grind it here, let's grind it there, and we came up with what he uses today. And for whatever reason, it's a little bit lighter. It seems to work great.
Well, that's new information. I didn't know that. That's a little goofball. I get this question a lot too. It's actually good for Al Augustus over here. It says, do you alter the center of gravity for the tour guides at all? Are you manipulating that with lead tape or by the shaft or whatever it is that you need to do to a golf club to manipulate the CG? But do you ever have to do that for a player?
We do, yeah. I don't know. Did you see that photo I posted a while ago about all that lead tape on the toe?
Yeah, yes, I did.
So that's
that.
That's one of those examples where a player came up to me and said, "I don't want to change my lie angles. I want to continue to see what I'm always used to seeing, but I want to see the ball fall a little bit softer to the right. How do we do it?" I said, "We got to move more weight toeward to slow down the way the toe's responding." So normally the toe would have natural face closure where it does this. That creates some of that draw bias, that lower flight. But in his situation, he said, "I just feel like it's wanting to start left, and I need to slow that down, but I don't want to change the lie." So that's where adding more mass toeward helps slow things down.
Let me ask you a question. This is just I could be dead wrong, but wouldn't the other way to do that, ball flight wise, would be to add more offset? You give it a little bit more offset to make it do that, as opposed to having to add weight to change the CD. But some players wouldn't like that optically, but adding offset would do the same thing.
You could, and sometimes when we add offset, that's the tough part is, can I look at it? Because it's really not what we're used to looking at. Right. I know there are some wedges nowadays that have some offset, like we still have some of the ping models that have some offset to them, and I know that
awesome.
Callaway's got one, and TaylorMade has one, and sometimes guys don't want to look at that. They've got more of a modern look into kind of straight lines or straight wedges. And in situations like what I was going through, you didn't want to change anything. You just needed to change that golf ball. So that's where we put that tape.
That's where having you guys is awesome. Having somebody with your expertise is awesome, because there's a million different ways to screw up that request. Right? You can go, we can do this, we can do that. And I had an interesting. You've been making wedges for Paul Casey for a long time, and he said something interesting on some YouTube video. He was talking about his clubs, and he was talking about how he bent. He would have like a 54-degree wedge and would bend it to 52 because he wanted the leading edge to match up with the leading edge of the hosel. Like he wanted it to appear like it was behind, but it wasn't like for an offset reason. He just wanted that whole thing to be flush. And I'm like, I couldn't wrap my head around what he was even saying. Did that make any sense to you at all?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what he meant by that. He's in the years we worked together, he's always been a 52, 56, 60 guy.
Right.
It may have had some onset at the time. That may have been the reason. So it's hard to say, but
it was in his Nike days when he said it. So he wasn't playing your stuff then when he said it's like a 2010. But he said it. I'm like, what the hell is he talking about? I couldn't figure it out.
Yeah, I just had a little bit of onset.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about JT. So he's also got a very interesting, loft configuration and even grind configuration. So walk me through his setup, because he goes, I think, 46, 51, 57, 61 or something goofy. So walk me through that.
Yeah, so he is 47.5, 52.5, 57, and 60.5. And I remember meeting Justin in the desert. He was at... where were we? We were at, I think we were at the stadium course. And I met him there, and I had known him just before a little bit, but we were just kind of getting started working together. And historically, he had always played the lofts that were on the golf club. So it was 52, 56, 60, whatever it was. And then as he continued to play on tour, he took a little break. And when he came back, like 3 weeks later, he brought his wedges in to get spec'd. And he was in the van, and I spec'd him out, and I just kind of looked at my numbers, and I go, wait a second, we got all kinds of problems here. I walked out, and this is all just through his own through his own exploration and testing and just doing work on his time off. I walked out and I said, "Hey, have you seen anything weird with your stuff recently?" And he goes, "No, I'm hitting it great. I'm hitting it better than ever, actually." And I said, "Have you made any changes?" And he goes, "Yeah, when I was home, I practiced a bunch and worked with my coach, and we bent a couple things, and I just wanted to make sure that my carry numbers were what I wanted them to be. These are the numbers I'm looking for." And I said, "Okay."
Nice.
And I said, "Right now, your lofts are 47.5, 52.5, 57, and 60.5. And he goes, "I don't care. That's good with me. Let's just keep it going."
Right.
And so that's kind of how that whole thing happened. Was he, through exploration and testing, he found his comfort numbers, and that's where we have his new lofts today.
Okay, I have a question for you. So those are perfect lofts based on the grinds and everything and the shaft, the wedge heads that he had there, right? But if you all of a sudden put him into SM8s, right, or if you put him into some new grinds, those lofts theoretically wouldn't necessarily work. You'd have to go through the whole process again to make sure that like, I guess what my point is, like, if he has a 52 that's an F grind and he switches to an S grind, 52 and a half necessarily won't hit the exact number that he wants that he did with the F grind. Like, it's going to change the essence of the golf club has changed a little bit. Does that make any sense? Like, if he changes grinds, that loft configuration might have to change. Well, it's not apple to apple.
Well, to be fair, we didn't really make major changes in those first two lofts. The major changes really exist in the higher lofts where we see this diminishing return in performance because of loft itself. When you start to get above 56, the ball tends to slip and slide on the face a little bit more, and that's why we have to be more precise in how we tool and we design, because we're trying to increase the consistency that we're getting on slippery kind of shots. The 46 and 52, we made very, very small changes to, because we didn't want to change that. When we talked to our tour players and said, whatever you guys are doing with the pitch and gap, just keep doing it. We really like it. So when I was working on Justin's set before we launched SM8, I have in-house samples that he gave me where I can just basically look at them and go, okay, this is exactly what he wants to see. This is the offset. This is the CG, all that stuff. And we just match it up, and then we build it up for him, and then we test. I did, during the PGA show, get a chance to go out to Grove 23 and work with him, confirm and look at his numbers, and they were all spot on, so we didn't have to worry about the wedges too much because we did a good job in the first batch.
So interesting. Like, your job is, like, you just live in the nuance, right? Like, it's one thing to just go out and buy wedges, but when you get to that level, it's so down to half a degree, a quarter of a degree. It's that's what I think. All this stuff to me is so fascinating. What's the gnarliest grind anybody's ever asked you to do?
Ooh, man,
when you're like, I don't even know if this is possible. Like,
there's been a lot of projects like that.
Okay.
I would say one of the more complicated sets that I've done over the years is some work that I do with Scott Piercy. And, he's got some and anybody who follows Golf WRX or follows golf in general knows that Scott is like the king of lead tape. Yeah. And the reason why is that, he doesn't want us to do certain things to the golf club. The way he delivers a wedge is very unique in the sense where he uses a lot of the trailing edge, but he shallows out at the bottom. Right. And he's really, really good with it. But it challenges me because I need to build golf clubs that are maybe kind of opposite of what we're trying to do in terms of design. So I do a lot of polishing on his. He likes no offset, square leading edges. Basically, the models that we used are 2 degrees weak. So we've got to take the bounce numbers down and reduce the trailing edges so he doesn't catch those. So the process is pretty challenging, which is why you always see a little bit of lead tape on the back of the stuff. Is as we polish, we're taking that natural weight away. He's got to put it back on.
Yeah, he's interesting. We talked a little bit about him on the podcast, but he because he's kind of like an early releaser up here. He kind of tosses it out there. The way he comes, David Toms is like that too. Like, he'll get to the top and throw it out there, but then they come down perfectly and they kind of hold on to it. And I'd have to imagine, especially with the wedges, that could be, it's an interesting way to go into the ball, right? It's not like your normal tour guy where he's kind of getting in there and digging into the ground. Rocco Media, it's that way too, I guess. Very shallow, very whatever. Okay, let me ask you this question. It says, I'm just shuffling some of these questions before we go. I want to make sure everybody get their Aaron fix. Talk about pre-worn leading edges, Aaron. Why is the question?
Good question. So you can do a couple things for pre-worn leading edges. A lot of times, in fact, most of the time when we do pre-worn leading edges, we're adding an extra element of bounce on square face shots. So most guys are between 7 and 11 degrees of descending blow, so they're down this, 7 to about 11 degrees on average. Okay. So they're reducing bounce there. One way for us to add one additional little bit of it is to, create what we call pre-wear, which is this little added shelf in the front. You see a lot of that in irons today, and you'll see a fair amount of that in wedges as well. This is just how we add a little extra something in there. When we go to an open championship, we'll actually take pre-wear, we'll sharpen leading edges. So we'll take bounce down and we'll sharpen leading edges to allow them to cut through what Bob calls the crust. That's just that thin, crusty layer that's on the first part of the surface. So it's all about kind of creating or adding some bounce and then reducing it when you get to situations like an open championship.
Okay. I get this question as well. What are your thoughts on grooves across the face? Because Titleist does not do that. So what is your opinion of?
We don't.
Are you going to?
I don't know. Maybe someday. I will say that if you came into our little wedge department, you would see a lot of moving parts. We study everything we can. We think it's important. Some things work, some things don't. I would say that we think about it, but the reality is that in the 15 years of making golf clubs, I've only seen one player that's been out there in that world, and that was Freddie Couples.
Right.
And that was probably 6-7 years ago. He had a perfect little dime-sized circle that was right. It was on the very end of the grooves of the toe, and about a quarter of that little circle was outside of the groove mark. He's the only guy I've ever seen in that spot. Even on rough impact, when we see that sideways spray, like when you look on the face of your wedge and you see that kind of spray towards the toe, I have yet to see anybody kind of get out of that spot. So I don't know. I mean, we study it. I can't say for sure if that's what we're going to do, but we're always thinking about those types of things.
Well, yeah, because if you look at, I've seen Freddie's clubs. If you look at the S grind that he has right now in his 60, the wear spots out towards the toe,
pretty far out there.
It's pretty far out there. And even in his short irons, if you look at his irons, it's out of the toe. It's like toe center.
Yeah, that's
whereas Mark's is on.
It's just kind of what he does. And I remember the first time I worked with him, I go, do you want me to bend this thing more upright or make it longer? And he's like,
I'm going to give you a new club or something.
He goes, I love it. He goes, just keep it there. I love where that's at. Just make me nuts.
Right.
So, I don't argue with that. He's obviously very, very good at what he does.
He's really Fred Couples. That's kind of all you need to know about that guy.
He's like the Chuck Norris of golf.
He kind of is. We're going to wrap this up, my friend. Going for about 45 minutes. I don't have any more questions here today. We're going to be back with Aaron next Wednesday. So if you guys have any more questions for Aaron, make sure you ask. I think next week I want to talk a little bit about the majors.
Yeah.
What your process is at the Masters, U.S. Open, all that stuff. I was going to do it this week, but I want to talk a little bit about fitting. So if you guys have any questions about what Aaron does at the majors, how that changes everything, make sure you DM me at Johnny_Wunder or at Golf WRX. Aaron's at Vokey Wedge Up. Really easy to find. Love to the family, AD.
Hey, you too, my friend.
Make sure you guys are washing your hands. I'll see you soon.
Pouring rain and hail in here, so we've got nowhere to go.
Oh, last question. When is the low bounce K coming?
Oh, that's a good question. Still to be determined right now with kind of the status of the world. I know it's coming real soon. I just need to finalize when that last date is, but it's coming soon. I'd probably say it's got to be next
fall. Uh-oh, something just happened.
I'm here.
Oh, there we go.
Yep.
All right, brother. God bless you. I'll see you next Wednesday.
Sounds great.
And I'm going to go homeschool.
Yeah. Good luck.
See you later. All right.
Stay safe.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks. You too. Bye.